They said it wasn't a thing. They said the timeline was clean. They said the whole world was lying and she was the only one telling the truth. And then one single question from a woman she did not expect to challenge her, cracked the entire performance open in real time, and Claressa Shields has not been the same since. This is not about a bad interview. This is not about a rude co-host. This is about a two-time Olympic gold medalist, a woman who is supposed to be the face of women's boxing, a woman chasing a Nike deal she keeps telling us is worth $20 million. Standing in front of a microphone and completely losing the plot because somebody finally asked her the question the Breakfast Club would not ask, the question Big Tigger would not ask, the question every soft glove interviewer in this cycle politely tiptoed around. How long are you going to keep being in a relationship with somebody's husband? That was it. That was the whole detonation. And what looked on the surface like a woman defending her love is actually, when you slow it down, when you watch the eyes, when you line up the timeline, when you check the court filing, when you read every subliminal she has posted since, the moment the entire Papoose fairy tale started collapsing under its own weight in front of a live audience. Everybody is watching the interview. Nobody is watching what has happened in the 72 hours since. And that is the actual story. Because when we get to the New Jersey court docket, the transaction ID, the filing date, and what Google will tell you about a divorce in that exact state when one spouse allegedly refuses to sign, and I promise you we are getting there. You are going to understand why every threat, every subliminal, every next chick come playing post on her timeline right now is not confidence. It is panic. And it is haunting her. Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Let me set the whole table for you so we are all working with the same picture, because I have noticed a lot of people are jumping into the middle of this story without understanding how we actually got here. And if you do not understand the setup, you cannot understand why this one interview hit the way it hit. Claressa Shields is arguably the most decorated American woman in boxing history. 2 Olympic gold medals. Undisputed at multiple weight classes. She has been telling anybody with a microphone that she is trying to be, in her own words, the Beyoncé of boxing. She wants the crossover deal. She wants the Nike money. She wants the face of the sport treatment that Serena got, that Simone got, that Sha'Carri is chasing right now. That is the brand she is trying to build. That is the ceiling she is trying to reach. And that is exactly why this Papoose situation is not just gossip. It is a direct threat to the number she keeps quoting us. Because you do not get a $20 million Nike deal when every headline attached to your name is the word side piece. You just do not. That is not how corporate America moves. That is not how endorsement committees vote. And on some level, deep down, she knows that, which is why the eyes get shifty every time the subject comes up. Now who is Papoose in this equation? Papoose is a New York rapper, a veteran, a guy who spent the better part of 2 decades married to Remy Ma in one of the most publicly celebrated hip-hop marriages of the modern era. Love and hip-hop episodes. Black love speeches on every red carpet. That's my queen every other bar on his mixtapes. The whole brand. That whole brand. And then, seemingly overnight, according to the timeline they want you to accept, he meets Claressa at the Shakur Stevenson fight in July of 2024. And by a couple weeks later they are in a full-blown relationship that neither of them announces publicly until Remy Ma herself is the one who outs it to the world. That is the situation. That is who these people are. That is the backdrop. And the stakes could not be more layered. Musically, Papoose's entire lyrical identity was built on being the loyal husband. Pull that thread and half his catalog is compromised. Culturally, the hip-hop community has extremely specific rules about how you leave one queen for another, and those rules were not followed. Financially, Claressa is chasing a 9-figure endorsement narrative that a public side-piece scandal actively poisons every quarter it stays in the news cycle. Reputationally, this is a woman who wants to be marketed as a disciplined, focused, elite athlete, and now she is being marketed by the internet as a homewrecker with shifty eyes. And here is the actual tension that drives everything from here forward. If it is really just a normal, clean, he was already separated situation like she keeps insisting, then why can she not sit still when the question is asked? Why do the eyes move? Why does the story change from interview to interview? And why, 1 full year later, is a divorce that both parties supposedly want still not finalized? Let's walk through what everybody can actually see with their own 2 eyes, because before we get to the deep stuff, before we get to the court records, before we get to the systemic pattern, we have to lay down the visible evidence, and there is a lot of it. Piece number 1. The Young Jack podcast clip itself. Claressa sits down for what is supposed to be a friendly, chart-topping conversation, and one of the female co-hosts asks her, respectfully, how much longer she is willing to be in a relationship with somebody's husband. That is the phrasing. That is the entire question. And instead of answering it like a woman with a clear conscience, Claressa says the word pause, like this is a video game, like this is a VHS tape somebody can rewind. You do not pause a live human being in the middle of a real conversation unless something inside you is screaming that the next sentence out of your mouth is going to make it worse. That is not composure. That is a stall tactic. That is a woman buying herself 3 seconds to reformat the answer she was about to give because the one she had ready would have ended her Nike run. Piece number 2, the eyes. And I know some of you are going to say I am reaching, but I want you to go back and watch that clip yourself and pay attention to nothing else but her eye contact with the woman who asked the question. She cannot hold it. Not for one full sentence. Her eyes are darting like the Felix the cat clock, left, right, up, down, anywhere but at the person she is supposedly telling the truth to. Compare that to how she looks at the male host who is throwing her softballs earlier in the same interview. Steady eye contact. Confident. Locked in. The behavior changes the second the tough question lands, and body language does not lie in situations like this. Piece number 3, the timeline she keeps repeating in her own words. She says on the podcast that her and Papoose had been together 6 months already at the time of the Remy reveal. She says on the Pivot podcast that they started dating in August of 2024. She says they first met at the Shakur Stevenson fight on July 6, 2024. She says she gave Papoose tickets to her own fight later that same month. Which means, if we are being generous, this woman fell in love, invited a married man to her professional fight, and started an official relationship with him inside of a 3 to 4 week window. And she wants us to believe that is a clean, organic, respectful courtship. Piece number 4, Tony Rich. Because here is the part that nobody in these soft interviews is asking her about. Tony Rich, her fiancé at the time, was posting I love you Claressa Shields on August 21st, 2024. Photos of her in her boxing robe. Heart eyes. Calling her his baby. Talking about wartime and precious moments. So if we accept her own stated timeline, that she and Papoose were dating by August, then her fiancé was publicly professing his love for her while she was, by her own admission, in a new relationship with somebody else's husband. And Tony Rich was at her July fight, the same fight Papoose attended. Which means one of two things is true. Either Tony Rich had absolutely no idea he had already been replaced, in which case Claressa was actively deceiving her own fiancé, or the timeline she keeps repeating on these podcasts is a lie designed to compress the overlap and make the whole thing sound cleaner than it was. Either way, the story does not survive contact with a calendar. And this is only the surface. This is what a fan with a phone and 30 free minutes on Twitter can figure out. Wait until you see what the people who actually cover this culture professionally are saying behind the scenes. And oh, do I have more for you? Because if you thought the interview clip was the ceiling of this thing, you have been watching the wrong movie. The interview is the trigger. Everything that has happened in the 72 hours since is the actual story, and the Papoose defenders online are really not going to like where the next section takes us. I need you to stay with me through this middle stretch, because when I show you what she has been posting on 3 different platforms at 3 different times of day after this interview dropped, you are going to understand that this is not a woman who is over it. This is not a woman who handled it with composure like the Breakfast Club is trying to sell you. This is a woman who is publicly unraveling in slow motion, one subliminal at a time, and the whole hip-hop internet has been documenting every single post. Buckle in. Let's talk about the reactions and the cultural fallout, because this is where the story stops being a Claressa problem and starts being a hip-hop problem. Cultural piece number 1, Remy Ma's own statements from earlier in this saga. Remy has said publicly, on camera, that if the full details of what actually happened in her marriage came out, it would crush the audience. Her exact words. She has said that she covered for Papoose out of love and years of loyalty, that her image could take the hit better than his, and that everything he has publicly claimed about their split is not the full picture. That is the wife. That is not some anonymous blog. That is not a hater account. That is the woman who is married to this man for the better part of 2 decades saying, on the record, that the version of events being sold to the public is a sanitized one. And Claressa's response to that has been to double down on the "he was already separated" narrative without ever addressing what Remy actually said. Cultural piece number 2, the subliminal posting schedule that has erupted since the Young Jack interview went viral. On her Twitter, one post. I'm not letting nobody else off the hook. Next chick come playing. I'm going all out. On her Facebook, a completely separate platform, at a completely different time of day, I'm exposing the truth from now on. Not letting these chicks off the hook no more. On her Instagram story, in response to the Shade Room reposting the interview clip, I'll just say this. This question was so corny. Papoose is separated and he filed for divorce. So leave me alone with that husband stuff. Lastly, I handled this with composure. God is working on me. 3 platforms. 3 different days. 3 different tones. That is not the posting behavior of a woman who is unbothered. That is the posting behavior of a woman who is refreshing her mentions every 90 seconds and cannot stop reacting to a question she claims did not affect her. Cultural piece number 3, the escalation from subliminals to what a reasonable person would read as threats. I swear to God these girls that be talking better not let me catch them outside. I got something for them too. Just come outside. Now let's be real adults about this. When a professional boxer, a woman who hits people for a living, a woman whose brother has caught a case for hitting a 75-year-old trainer, a woman who has been credibly accused of assault at a Netflix after-party, starts posting, come outside. Energy on main. The culture reads that as a threat. That is not me being dramatic. That is not me putting words in her mouth. That is the plain language interpretation any reasonable person would arrive at. And the fact that her PR team has not scrubbed those posts tells you either she does not have a PR team worth the money, or she is refusing to listen to them, which is arguably worse. Cultural piece number 4, the AI filtered photo controversy, and this is the one that has actually broken hip-hop Twitter in half. There are pictures circulating on her socials right now where Papoose does not even look like Papoose anymore. The filters are so heavy, the AI enhancement is so aggressive, that the man in the photo looks like a completely different person. Fans have been openly asking, who is that? Some people have joked that he looks like a GTA character. Others have pointed out that in almost every recent public appearance, either Claressa is wearing the Wingate Records chain or Papoose is wearing it, but you almost never see them wearing the matching pair together. Which is what actual established couples in hip-hop do, Beyoncé and Jay, Cardi and Offset in their prime, Nicki and Kenneth. 2 people with $8 million combined, in a supposedly rock-solid public relationship, and they cannot be photographed in the same jewelry at the same time. Now to be fair, and I want to give you the nuance here because this is where a lot of commentary channels get lazy, you could argue the chain thing is a coincidence. You could argue the AI photos are just a filter trend and every celebrity does it. You could argue the subliminals are just her processing publicly. I hear that argument. I understand it. But you have to stack these things together to see the pattern. Any one of them in isolation is nothing. All 4 of them together, in the same 2-week window after the same interview, is a woman whose story is not holding up under the weight of its own contradictions. And when you zoom out from the culture and start looking at the business layer, the actual paperwork, the actual filings, the actual legal machinery, that is when the whole thing stops looking like a messy relationship and starts looking like something much more calculated. Now I need you to shift gears with me, because everything I have shown you so far is what your favorite reaction channel could have shown you. The clips, the subliminals, the timeline. That is entry-level analysis. What I am about to walk you through is the layer that separates people who actually pay attention to how this industry works from people who just react to whatever the Shade Room posts. There are 3 interconnected systemic angles here, and once you see how they fit together, you are never going to look at a Claressa Shields interview the same way again. Angle 1, the New Jersey court filing itself. Because Papoose did file for divorce. That part is not a lie. The document exists. It was filed in New Jersey in May of 2025. The transaction ID is on the paperwork. The filing fee of $325 was paid. All of that is verifiable public record. But here is what nobody in the mainstream hip-hop press is telling you, and here is the question that Claressa cannot answer on any of these podcasts without her eyes going sideways. It has been over a year. It is now August of 2026. A divorce filing from May of 2025 is 15 months old and still, apparently, unresolved. And when you go and look up New Jersey divorce law, which I did, and which anybody can do in about 90 seconds on Google, the state of New Jersey explicitly allows a divorce to be finalized even when one spouse refuses to sign or cooperate. There is a legal mechanism called default judgment. There is a contested divorce hearing process. One spouse cannot indefinitely block a divorce simply by withholding a signature. which means the Remy won't sign narrative that has been quietly circulating in Papoose's defense, including in one of his own recent rap verses where he alluded to a signature issue, does not actually hold up as a legal explanation for why this thing is still open 15 months later. If he wanted this divorce finalized, and he has, in his own words, $1.5 million legal counsel on retainer, this should have been closed out months ago through the exact court procedures the state provides for exactly this situation. So why is it still open? That is the question nobody is asking, and it is the question that turns this whole story upside down. Angle 2, the incentive structure. Now let's think about this like a business analyst, not a fan. If Papoose is genuinely done with the marriage, if he genuinely wants to be with Claressa, if he genuinely filed for divorce out of love, then finalizing that divorce is the single most valuable public relations move he could make right now. It would silence every critic. It would legitimize the relationship. It would allow Claressa to actually be introduced as his partner instead of his allegedly. It would remove the biggest single obstacle between her and that Nike deal she keeps referencing. There is no world in which a strategically minded couple in their position would leave this paperwork unresolved for 15 months if both parties actually wanted it resolved. Which leaves us with only a few possibilities, and none of them are good for Claressa. Possibility 1. Papoose does not actually want the divorce finalized as fast as he is telling her he does. Possibility 2. Remy is legally contesting it in ways that are more complicated than the public knows. Possibility 3. There are financial or custodial entanglements that make finalization far more expensive than either party wants to admit. In any of those scenarios, Claressa is the one holding the shortest end of the stick because she is the one out here publicly defending a status she does not actually control. Angle 3. The media manufacturing machine around all of this, and this is the piece I really want you to sit with. Look at the pattern of who has interviewed Claressa about this situation and how those interviews have gone. The Breakfast Club soft. Melissa Ford soft. Big Tigger soft. Every major platform that has had her in the chair has, with one recent exception, given her the opportunity to control the narrative without pushback. And then, after the young Jack co-host actually asked her the real question, the Breakfast Club came out and tried to spin the clip as if Claressa handled it with poise, when the actual footage shows a woman who could barely maintain eye contact with her interviewer. That is not journalism. That is what I would call manufactured coverage, a coordinated soft glove treatment across multiple platforms designed to protect a public figure's brand while the messier truths sit in plain sight. And when you understand that this is how the media layer around Claressa has been functioning, you start to understand why one honest question from one female co-host caused this much damage. It was not the question itself. It was the fact that the question was allowed to be asked at all, in an ecosystem that has spent a year making sure it would not be. That is the systemic story. That is the machine. And that machine is now visibly cracking because the audience finally saw what an actual question looks like, and they are never going to accept the soft version again. So here is the truth bomb, and I want you to sit with this one because I do not think most of you have fully absorbed what it actually means. The reason Claressa Shields is coming apart in real time is not because one interviewer asked her a hard question. It is because for the last 12 months, this entire relationship has allegedly been sustained by a narrative that requires an unfinalized divorce to keep working. And she is only just now figuring out that the divorce may never actually be finalized on the timeline she was promised. Let that sit. Because if you follow the logic all the way down, this is not a story about a woman who fell in love with a married man. This is allegedly a story about a woman who was told, by a much older, much more media-experienced man, that the paperwork was moving, that the marriage was over in everything but signature, that the wife would sign any day now, that the whole thing was already handled. And she believed him. She got the tattoo. She started calling him hubby on social media. She went on podcast after podcast defending a status she was told was temporary. And now, 15 months after the initial court filing, with no updated documentation, with no finalization date, with no court hearing announcement, with nothing but she won't sign as the recurring explanation, Claressa is standing in front of a microphone realizing, in front of the entire hip-hop internet, that she may have been sold a version of events that reality is not confirming. That is the real story. Not the shifty eyes. Not the come outside posts. Not the AI-filtered photos. The real story is that a two-time Olympic gold medalist with generational earning potential appears to have allegedly built her personal life on a promise that the paperwork was going to catch up any minute, and the paperwork has not caught up. And every additional interview, Every additional subliminal, every additional threat directed at random women online is her processing that realization in public without the emotional tools or the media training to do it privately. And the reason the young Jack question hit her so hard is that it was the first time somebody made her say the ugly version of the truth out loud, in front of an audience, with cameras rolling. Papoose is still, on paper, legally married to Remy Ma. That is not opinion. That is not shade. That is a New Jersey court record. And every day that passes without a finalized decree, Claressa Shields is walking around introducing herself as somebody's partner, while the state of New Jersey continues to introduce him as somebody else's husband. That is the reveal. That is what the whole 72-hour meltdown is actually about. And when you understand that, every single one of those subliminals, every next chick come playing, every come outside, every God is working on me reads completely differently. Those are not threats aimed at other women. Those are the sounds of a woman who is starting to suspect she was played, and who does not yet have the language to admit it to herself, let alone to us. Which brings me to the person nobody is talking about in this entire conversation, and, honestly, this is the part of the story that I think we owe more attention to. Remy Ma. Because while Claressa Shields is out here posting threats on 3 different social platforms, and losing her eye contact on every podcast that will book her, Remy Ma has been quiet. Not silent. She has said her piece, once, clearly, on her own terms, and then she went back to living her life. She has not been on a subliminal tour. She has not been threatening anybody to come outside. She has not been posting AI-filtered photos trying to reshape public perception. She has just been existing, doing her work, letting the paperwork sit in the court system where it belongs, and letting the woman who took her husband do all the public defending on his behalf. That is what discipline looks like. That is what someone who actually knows their worth looks like. And that is the contrast this whole story eventually resolves into, whether Claressa's fans want to admit it or not. One woman is out here running her mouth every 48 hours trying to convince the internet that she is not a side piece. The other woman said her piece one time and has not needed to repeat it since, because the truth does not require maintenance. That is the whole story in one sentence. And when you look at it that way, you start to understand why Remy has been the one winning this entire time, even in the moments when the narrative made it look like she was losing. She kept her dignity. She kept her fan base. She kept her platform. And she let the machinery of the situation embarrass the other party on its own timeline, without ever having to lift a finger. Meanwhile, Claressa is out here allegedly threatening private citizens on social media, damaging her own Nike prospects with every post, and giving interviews that raise more questions than they answer. If you are trying to build a lasting career in this culture, and Claressa keeps telling us she is, you study how Remy has handled this year. You do not study how Claressa has handled it. The person with the composure wins. The person without it burns their own house down and blames the neighbors for smelling smoke. And here is the part that should land the hardest for anybody watching this play out. The truth was never actually in danger. Remy did not have to fight for it. The court record fights for it. The unfinalized divorce fights for it. Papoose's own lyrics fight for it. Claressa's own shifty eyes on the Young Jack podcast fight for it. Every single element of this story confirms the version Remy told a year ago, without her ever having to say another word about it. That is what it looks like when you are actually right. You do not have to scream. You do not have to threaten. You do not have to filter your photos into oblivion. You just have to wait, and the truth walks itself to the front of the room. So when I say the right person is still winning here, I do not mean it as a shot at Claressa. I mean it as a description of what is actually happening. The person who moved with integrity is in a stronger position today than the person who did not, and the gap between them is going to keep widening for every additional week this paperwork stays open. Now this is only the start, and I want to be specific about what I mean by that, because I do not do vague teases on this channel. There are 2 concrete things I am watching over the next few weeks, and if you want to catch them the moment they break, you need to be subscribed right now because both of them are going to move fast. Thing number 1, the divorce paperwork. We are now 15 months into a filing that should have been closed by now. Something is going to break on that front. Either Papoose is going to invoke the default judgment mechanism I walked you through earlier, in which case we are going to have a finalized decree and a whole new phase of this story to analyze, or the case is going to continue sitting in that New Jersey courthouse and the questions about why it is stalled are going to get louder and harder to dodge. Either outcome is a video. Either outcome changes the shape of everything Claressa is currently saying. Thing number 2, the Nike deal she keeps referencing. The $20 million Nike deal. Because endorsement committees do not move on athletes with active side piece scandals in the news cycle. That is just not how corporate risk assessment works. So either that deal is going to materialize despite the noise, in which case we are going to have a fascinating case study in how much sponsorships have shifted in the last 5 years, or that deal is going to quietly disappear and Claressa is going to have to explain to her fan base why the number she has been quoting us for a year never actually arrived. Either outcome is a video. Both outcomes are coming. And if you want the full timeline breakdown, the one I have been threatening to do, the deep dive on every single date, every social media post, every fight, every appearance from July of 2024 through today, all lined up in chronological order so you can see with your own eyes why the story does not add up. Drop the word timeline in the comments and be specific about it. Do not just leave the word by itself. Actually engage with what we talked about today. Tell me what stood out to you. Tell me what you want me to dig into next, because that is how we build this thing together. And on that note, the next video I want you to click is the one where I break down exactly how much of Papoose's public career catalog is directly compromised by this Claressa situation, because there is one specific song, released before any of this became public knowledge, that in hindsight reads like a confession, and once I show you the lyrics side by side with the timeline, you will not be able to unhear it. The signs were in the music the whole time. Nobody was listening. I was listening. Click it now.